Hi everyone, welcome to Motor Psychology from wherever you are on this planet. My name's Jonathan. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you're a return person, welcome as well. In today's video, I'm going to be taking apart a lower right control arm on a 1977 C3 Corvette. So I'm going to be showing you the process that I use to get the control arm out, and that includes taking the springs off, the shocks off, the steering knuckle, and also the brakes and rotor as well. So I hope you enjoy the video, you find it useful and maybe helpful, or at least interesting in some of your projects. So stick around and let's get into it. Well, today is certainly going to be the beginning of a big job. I'll be doing the control arms, shocks, springs, various bushings on the control arm, stabilizer bar, and refreshing the brakes as well. Doing tie rod ends and ball joints. So this is the beginning, part one, and I'll be doing a refresh on the frame in this area and also the wheel wells as well. Certainly control arm bushings are a little bit fried down there. That's a good picture of the control arm bushing right there. And we'll be taking this off shortly. I'm using my impact wrench here to try and loosen the top nut on the shock absorber. Sometimes you're lucky and able to jar it loose by a quick blast of your wrench. If not, you have to resort to a pair of pliers and a regular wrench. I'm going to try this one now. The other one didn't work, so let's give that one a shot. So down there you'll see that I have a wrench and a pair of vice grips to hold the top of the shock, and I'll undo it that way. Now I'm moving over to the lower part of the shock, and it has two bolts on it. So I'm just using my impact wrench to loosen and get these off. Once you have those bolts out, it's just a matter of pulling down the shock. It's pretty easy. Pretty straightforward. Now I'm moving ahead, getting ready to remove the front wheel components. But before I do that, I'm taking off the brake hose. So I'm removing it from the frame side first, and then I'm going to remove it from the caliper. Once that's off, then I can start disassembling the front wheel. These brake hoses will be replaced with brand new ones once I put everything back together. You're looking at the front right wheel from just behind it. So what I'm doing here now is getting ready to take the steering knuckle off. So I'm working on the lower ball joint, and right now I'm just removing the cotter pin, and after that I'm going to work on getting that nut off of the lower ball joint, and we'll see how that goes. I have to admit, these were pretty tough to get out considering they're cotter pins. But, you know, it's been together for a long time, and once I get it fixed, there's no way that I'm going to let it get as oily and greasy as it is right now. That's awesome, and I finally got it off. Now I'm going to spray some PB Blaster on the nut and try and get that off. Here I am, getting ready to use the breaker bar to see if I can crack this nut. But you know what? I moved on to something else after that. I like to start with the lowest setting on my impact gun and see if that will be enough to loosen the nut. If not, then I will gradually increase the settings on the impact wrench in order to get this thing undone. Now I'm working on the upper ball joint cotter pin, and I'm using a combination of my needle nose pliers and a hammer and vice grips in order to convince this cotter pin to come out. Yeah, it was a good feeling to finally get it out. Finally. Just moving in position to use the air impact wrench to take off the castle nut on the upper ball joint. It was a pretty tight spot, so I had to use a flexible socket adapter. Once again, for this one, I used the lowest setting and moved to a higher setting if I wasn't able to get this castle nut off with any luck. Here I'm getting ready to take the wheel components off, and that will be removing the caliper, the rotor, and also the hub and steering knuckle assembly. So what you're going to see in the next series of video is that process. As I'm doing this, I'm just thinking to myself about all these other things that I still need to plan and do to this C3. So this is just the beginning of a ton of refresh and restoration types of things that I'm doing. And you got to start somewhere, and you got to stay positive. So I'm now taking the caliper off before I take the steering knuckle off. There's a couple bolts on each side that need to come out before you take the caliper out. There we go. And the caliper is going to come out like so. That's off. It's great. I went ahead and I put the retaining bolts for the caliper back in the caliper so that I didn't lose it or misplace them before I wanted to put the calipers back on. So at least I have the calipers and the retaining bolts all in one place. And doing the same for the other side as well, just so I don't lose those two. Just put some paper towels in there to keep the brake pads in place. Now I'm going to take the rotor off. Should just slide right off. I think I had it pretty easy here. There are C3s out there that the rotors still have the rivets in, and you have to drill the rivets out before taking the rotors off. I was lucky, my rivets were out, so it was just a matter of pulling the rotor off. Rotor's off, which is great. I'm at the lower steering knuckle where the tie rod is, so my goal is to separate the tie rod end from the lower steering knuckle. It's a lot easier said than done. It takes quite a lot of work, but once again, all this stuff is doable. I had this out of frame a little bit, so on your right of the screen is the tie rod that I'm removing from the lower steering knuckle. So I'm hammering it gently a few times, and eventually I get it to bust loose, and you'll see that in a second. Perfect. That's progress. Got that out. Woo. Happy, happy. Now the rest. Just gotta split this. See if I can get this up here. Now I'm going to split that and split that. I'll put the nuts on here so that they don't fall, the whole steering knuckle doesn't completely fall down. Before I can take the steering knuckle off, I've got to remove the wheel hub assembly. So that's what I'm doing right now. Yeah, so using a 3/4 in here. I'm just getting ready to remove the front dust cover. That will allow me to get access to the retaining nut and then also get the hub off. So I'm going to take the hub off here. When I put it back on, I'll be putting new bearings, repacking it. I'm going to take the cotter pin out as per normal with everything. Darn it. Cotter pin out. Put that somewhere safe, although I probably won't reuse it. Time to take this out. And should be able to remove this hub right now. I'm going to keep everything in place for now until I repack it with the new bearings. And this can come out no problem. Swipe this down. That looks in great shape. Yeah, it's all original, and this Corvette only has 63,000 miles on it in the past 44 years. And by the looks of it, all this is original stock equipment and never been removed before. I've got the open-ended wrench on this side, and on the other side I'm going to use the pneumatic wrench. Perfect. This can come off. That's off. And this other component of the steering knuckle is off as well. So I'll put all this aside. I'll take the bolts that I took off and I'll put the nuts on them. That way I won't lose them. I'm finally in a good position to get the steering knuckle off. And I'm going to be hitting it up here and down here. And the same thing on this side, up here and down there. There is a really convenient flat spot on both sides, up and down, to hit the steering knuckle, so it's pretty good. I want to loosen the top one first. Yeah, see how that one popped off? I left this castle nut on so that it wouldn't drop all the way. Now I have to do the same thing to the bottom. I'm going to take this off as well.
I'm taking the stabilizer bar connection rod off of the lower control arm before I remove the lower steering knuckle, and it just gives a little bit more flexibility for the control arm to drop.
I'm going to take that off and then restack it so I know what order they go in. Here's the order they go in. I'm not going to be replacing this one. I'm going to be putting new ones back on. But it's nice to know the order. And I'll save this with all the other parts. Now back to getting this thing back off.
The bottom part of the steering knuckle was sticking, so I decided to take the top part of the steering knuckle off first. That made it easier to bang out the bottom.
There, I finally got that bottom one off. Yep. Steering knuckle is off. So right now we've got everything off. The spring is compressed, and it's just a matter of lowering the control arm. So we're going to do that now.
The control arm is pretty stiff, so I'm pushing down on it to give me enough room so I'll be able to remove the spring. Just a reminder, my spring is compressed with a spring compressor, and that allows me to push down on the control arm just enough to effectively allow me to get that spring out of there quite easily.
There's the spring out, and the control arm is ready to come down. That's what the compressed spring looks like. So I'm going to uncompress it and then send it to scrap. So for me, it's just a matter of loosening this thing gradually.
I'm actually not too sure if I'm going to scrap this. I may have another look at it. If it looks salvageable, I'm going to sandblast it, repaint it or powder coat it, and then reinstall it because I really like the ride height that I currently have on this C3. Kind of an awkward setup for this spring compressor. Like, I get it and it works, but it's a little bit of a handful and a little bit awkward. But for the sake of safety, I think it was worth using it.
And that is the spring out. And that's your spring removal tool. And the spring.
Yeah, I always try and keep my work area as clean as possible. It doesn't take long for things to get dirty and oily.
Okay, the control arms have 3 bolts attaching them, one here and 2 smaller ones here. So the smaller ones are a 5/8 socket, and the one larger one is a 7/8 socket. So I'm going to loosen the larger one first. I'm going to spray these with PB Blaster and let them sit for a while. I've also got the controller jacked up so that when it comes off, it doesn't just fall on me.
I changed camera views here so that you can actually see me remove the bolts from where the control arm attaches to the frame, or at least a better view than the previous shot.
All right, I'm gonna take the last one out slowly.
You may notice in the upper left of this video that the radiator core support is pretty rusted and corroded. So that's going to be replaced very soon. So stick around and look out for that video. So finally, after 44 years, it's time to get the bolts out and lower the control arm.
The one control arm out. And moving on to refreshing this one. Hey guys, I'm going to end it on this one with the right control arm being removed and set down. So next I'll go about restoring that one and also removing the left control arm. So give me a like if you like this video, subscribe if you want to, and we'll see you around in the next one. See ya.